Welcome. In my last video, I gave you a bunch of information about the numbers on the cards, but I really didn't tell you how to use them. You may recall also that I made two statements that are going to come back in this video. First, that all players' value can be determined by their base card. Second, the only random aspect to a card's values is the grade increase. These two factors are going to come into play in this video. So what we're going to focus on is how to take any card and calculate what the base card is such that we can determine what the value is. By doing so, we'll be able to use a table such as this one to get a relative idea of how this player stacks up against other ones and whether or not we might be keeping it. Before we jump into that, though, let me make a quick aside and point out that all the visuals that I'm using in these videos I'm providing on a Google Drive share, and these files are linked in the description for the video. So what we're going to do is jump over here into a roster and take a look at the simplest case. Let's take a look at a bronze player and Inciarte, for example. And you'll notice that we have his numbers, but we don't know what his base card is because this is a bronze. So there are two ways to determine this. I'm going to give you the exact and precise method first, and then I'm going to give you a quicker way of making that calculation without having to do as much math. So first, what we're going to do is add together all of his scores at the bottom of the card to come up with a total, which will come out as 343. And then we're going to do the same for the top for the grade increase, which will total out at 11. Now that we have these two numbers, we'll subtract the grade increase from the total for his scores and come up with his final score, which we will then divide by 5 to find out what his base card OVR. Two things to note here. First, the OVR came out as 66.4, and the game always rounds down. It will never round up, as in the case of 66.7, that would not round up to 67. The second thing is that you will note that this OVR is roughly 2 points lower than his bronze card, which was OVR 68. Keep that in mind as we look at the other method. The second method we're going to use is simpler but less precise. It's going to rely on the fact that we know that his bronze card was 68 OVR, and if you take a look at his grade increase scores, which total out at 11, and you divide these by 5, you get roughly 2. Now if you subtract that 2 from the 68, it brings you down to 66, and that would be the OVR of his normal card. Now let's look at something a little bit more complex, but we'll find that the concepts are still the same. Let's take a look at a different grade player who's also been leveled up a little bit, so he has enhancements on his card. We'll look at Brantley here. We'll do the same thing. We're going to crack open his numbers, and then we're going to add together his base score, and then from that we're going to subtract his grade increase and his enhancements to determine what his original card's scores were, and then we can divide those by 5 and come up with his base card's OVR. And similarly, if we use the second method, we can simply add together all the top numbers, divide those by 5, and take this number and subtract it from his displayed card OVR, which is 76, and come up with 71 OVR. Okay, now let's bring it up another level and take a look at a diamond card that is in my roster. This will mean that we have enhancements, grade increase, we'll have a set bonus in effect, and we'll also have some equipment. But once again, this doesn't change the strategy here at all. We're still going to be totaling up his current numbers, then going ahead and subtracting the total of all those other enhancements to come up with his base OVR, or base scores, and then divide that by 5 to find out what his base OVR is. Same type of thing once again for method 2, totaling out all of his additions, divide those by 5, and subtract that number from his displayed OVR. Okay, so in our final example, we're going to go through the same thing once again, but this time with a signature card, because there's a little bit of a tricky part to this that might be missed if you're not careful. But nonetheless, the approach is still the same. We got Trout here. We're going to be adding together his displayed numbers at the bottom. We're going to be adding together all of its enhancements, but the trick here is we need to make sure that even though it says set deck plus 5 and signature increase plus 5, you might think those would be representing the same number. They are not. So you have to add them in both when you're totaling things out. So as you can see here, I've done that, and once we subtract that all and then divide it, we come up with his base card's OVR. Once again, method 2 will be the same as well. We'll just add together all those numbers, divide them by 5, and take that rough number and subtract that from his current displayed OVR to find his base card's OVR. So now I've given you all the tools to take any card and backtrack it down to the base version of the card so that you can make valid comparisons based off of it. Using this information, suddenly this table becomes more relevant, and we can see with the base OVR in hand, we can figure out if our card is in the very good range and comparable to other players, and then ultimately what the max OVR will be, which will be the subject for another video. And we'll also get into the variability of the grade increases and more card comparisons and actual scenarios.